All right, shall we?
We shall.
I just always do the casual affair here, really. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's make a start. My name is Richard Andrew, and I have great pleasure in having on as a guest Steve Brophy from Victoria. I'll introduce Steve formally in a second, but let just do some logistics. I'll introduce myself. So I'm a consultant, education consultant. I've been doing this on and off for 15 years or so. I tend to work or have worked with a lot of mathematics departments. My main thing really is student agency. How do we foster it? How important is it? I think it's extremely important, because if we're teaching a bunch of kids and they don't have agency, then our role as a teacher is so much more difficult, and their role to learn anything is so much more difficult. So let's work out how to present whatever we're presenting in ways that foster agency. To me, that's just common sense. We don't need any research for that. It's just obvious. And I learned that the hard way in my early years of teaching, because most of what I was doing was the opposite of what I needed to be doing, and what I wanted, I wasn't getting. So, and then eventually you sort of, you work it out. So that's kind of what I do. I have asynchronous online PD and work with departments, but I also work with whole schools and whatever. So I've been running some of these LinkedIn events of late. Most of them have an AI focus, but they don't all have an AI focus. I'm just coming across amazing leaders in the field. And if they've got something that really interests me, in other words, it's a little bit left field, it's common sense, it makes sense, they're making progress, then I'll ask them can I interview you and have a chat? So that's kind of how these work. And I met Steve over the Zooms a while back, recommended by someone else, and we had a very interesting chat. So this thing could go anywhere. This one, strategic foresight in the age of AI, anticipating and shaping the future. And as we'll find out in a sec, Steve, who's an educator, writer, thinker, and a passion for deep questions, he works with futures thinking, and I had no idea what that meant. But once we started chatting, I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. So we'll get Steve to talk a lot about that. He's the Director of Digital Transformation at Ivanhoe Grammar School in Victoria, in Australia. So we've got two Aussies on here, although I'm beaming in from New Zealand. So, Steve, welcome aboard. Great to finally have this happening. Can you just give us a quick rundown of, 2 minutes, how you got to your current position, and then you can lead that into your interest in futures thinking, and et cetera, et cetera.
Beautiful. Well, I've been an educator for about 23 years, and I began as a jock. I began teaching physical education, and then through deep questions, exploration, I moved across to working with technology. And so for the last 10 to 12 years, I've been exploring how we can use technology to extend capacity, and always been with a pedagogical lens, that pedagogy first. And so what has led me to exploring futures thinking is I've always been somebody who has loved strategic foresight, who has loved thinking and dreaming and imagining new futures. And so in the world of AI, that becomes really an essential literacy as we move forward. So what I'm talking about is futures thinking is really the science of anticipation, is dreaming forward, imagining, hey, if this fringe technology is launching at the moment. So one I posit to my students is, if autonomous vehicles become a thing, what happens to the rite of passage of getting your license? Can you imagine a world where you don't get your license, or your kids don't get your license? And so using imagination, we try to feel and emote what a world would look like with that. And so futures thinking is based off some pretty big thinking, some great frameworks from UNESCO. Real Miller does some brilliant work. He's the chair for futures thinking, future studies for UNESCO. The Institute for the Future, Jane McGonigal and the crew there, who've been going for 50 years. But really what they do is try to anticipate what the world may look, feel like, have a look around using imagination based from now. And so what it does is when you can dream yourself into a situation and think about all the possibilities and all of the other situations that may occur,
Yep.
you can anticipate how you might react and also posit the question, is this the future you want? And do we want to move in a different direction? So very much that I've always been a dreamer. And so futures thinking is just a beautiful lens to look through, to imagine and anticipate. And I'm very much a student of the field, but I find that as a capacity, it's one of the many literacies that I am advocating for with students these days.
So, Steve, you often talk about this as futures literacy, I think, and also futures thinking. So can you talk about because that's what confused me a little bit, because you mentioned that term when we first chatted and I went, futures literacy, what's that?
So you think of the word being literate, it is really developing a set of a toolkit around futures thinking. So you're building up a capacity to think about what the world may look like looking forward, but also looking backwards. So backcasting is a methodology that's used in futures thinking to look at the patterns that human beings have used over time and how might we react in a situation based on previous patterns.
Yeah.
So futures thinking is really the container, and then you build up a literacy, a set of skill sets within that. So that's the way that I look at it.
And how long have you been interested in this? Obviously, well before AI started.
Wow. Yeah. Well, do you know, the interesting thing is when I found it, it spoke to me in a way that it was like this is the way I've always thought. I've always been a kid who dreamed and imagined worlds and walked around in those worlds. And so when I bumped into the discipline, I just went, oh, this explains the way that I look and view the world and try. And also the spaces that I find deep flow. I like to imagine. I like to dream forward and then bringing that back, create little artifacts, create scenarios, collect signals, which are really just fringe movements, technologies, etc., social changes. I've always been interested in it. So when I bumped into the discipline, it just resonated on such a deep level as a way that I've always thought. And so I'm continuing to develop my own capacity. And that's where I lean on thought leaders like Sahel, Inyatullah, and those leaders 80 who've done tremendous work in the space. But personally, it just was my jam.
I've always wondered whether before the big AI noise started happening this year, like it's climate change or it's, there's all overpopulation, and I've always wondered whether people actually think about what's the chance there's going to be a functioning civilization in 100 years or 200 years or 1,000 years. That's just doesn't seem to be in the consciousness. And so that so many decisions are made on short-term financial gains and no one seems, I don't know, that's the sense that I've had, is that there's not enough forward thinking. Would you agree with that?
Look, yes and no. I think there are a bunch of people in the strategic foresight space who are doing it. And one of the things that's really important to note is the word futures, because it's deliberetely plural, deliberately many. Yeah. So one of the words that I like is this notion of polytopia, like many topias. So when we dream forward, we think we're quite binary with dystopia, utopia. And so you take the world of artificial intelligence and it's quite easy to get in the weeds and think it's just going to end humanity. And then on the flip side, it's quite easy to be dreamy and idealistic about it. But in actual fact, there are so many futures that are possible. And so and hence why the literacy part's really important, is if everybody is dreaming forward, so my future and the futures that I think are going to be different to the futures that you think of. But it's really, really important that you are doing that. And then we have discourse about it. So building the capacity allows people to shape the future, because what you make salient, what you bring to your attention, you bring focus to. And so part of what we're doing with conversations around AI is let's explore dystopian futures, and not the doom and gloom of it, but look around that future. What happens? There was an article just recently about P-doom scores, which are what experts in the space of artificial intelligence believe is the possibility that AI could end humanity. That's pretty heavy to carry.
Yeah.
But if we don't actually stare into it, think about it, look, feel, emote, think about other situations, it will never chart a path forward. There's an inevitability to it. We kind of believe that it'll just happen to us. But we have agency. And, the root of the word agency is doers. And so you have the ability to take action. And so what futures thinking does is it allows you, because the future has not happened, we can only kind of look around the present moment. So thinking forward allows us to think from this moment, if I went to that path, here are the possibilities that potentially could happen. And more importantly, is it a path that I want to move towards, or do I want to move in a different direction?
So this is perhaps a good thing to weave in a couple of points. I've made a stance. I refuse to read any article that is written by an AI obsessive or an AI, there's this guy who's in my Facebook feed. He's a marketer, of course, he's a marketer. And it's like, I'm obsessed with AI, and it's just like, oh, give me a break. And the flip side to that, and I'll put the link in the chat, but I'll also put this link on the timestamp replay, because I know you've seen this a few times, but I came across the AI dilemma, which I want to give a plug, because everyone needs to watch this show. It's if you remember the social dilemma, it was brought by the same people, but interestingly, these guys were asked to develop this presentation by researchers in the AI field to shine a light on the dangers that they see and the trap that they feel they're caught in, because the phenomenal pace of progress has been driven by companies who want to get that first grab of the pie, and so that's an interesting background. But I've found it incredibly enlightening and not the least a bit scary. And I think this relates to what you're saying, because these guys are looking at the potential pitfalls that we're currently in and trying to look at what could result and how can we avoid those worst case scenarios. And so I think that they're very much in line with what you're saying. But would you agree? That fits in with the... Yeah,
absolutely. Because you take The Social Dilemma as a movie, what they created was a beautiful artifact, a story for people to see the impact of social media.
Yes.
And so that artifact was deliberately story-based, deliberately Netflix style. And so what it created, that's a scenario that allows you to think and place yourself in the story, which is what human beings are doing. We always find ourselves within the story. And so the AI dilemma then is another example of an artifact looking at scenarios, using their expertise, the collective expertise of the people that they lean on. The room that they were presenting to as well was a room of very important thought leaders in the space. And then creating a story that's publicly accessible for people, because we have to see the many futures. And I'm one of the people who I actually do read the echo chamber articles, purely for the fact that I always like to go to the edge, to the fringe, and then swing the pendulum back to the other side. Yeah. And then I find my way in the middle. It's always been the middle. And Timnit Gebru is somebody for people to check out. Her work in the AI ethics space. She used to be to work for Google, published some pieces that she was dismissed about, raising the ethics. And she's just as a really good voice of reason. There's a great interview with her on Technology Will Not Save Us podcast. So I always say to people, what aren't you seeing? Because if you take your worldview, you are biased. You are going to limit it. You can only take in certain things. So it's really, really important to ensure that you garner or gather different perspectives. And so this is where building a story, building an artifact like the AI dilemma is really, really important, because it allows everybody to kind of look through their own lens at this, imagine it, and then talk from their worldview with other people who have viewed it. So you and I can have a discourse just about that because it's potent. And what it's doing is it's creating a ripple effect of conversations, and it's opening people's aperture to take in more information, to walk with something that maybe they didn't foresee beforehand. And that's a futures thinking approach.
So I am prone to making sweeping statements, Steve, so don't, but it's actually just voicing my disdain, I guess. You know, there's so much noise out there, and I understand why they do, because they're seeing this as a great opportunity to make money. But it's just that lack of awareness of the bigger picture that bothers me. And so now, like when I do come across those, I'll be saying, you have to watch this. You have to watch this documentary.
So and part of it is to raise for another literacy, our digital literacy. So one of the challenges that my kids face is with the volume of information that's available, with the percentage of that information that's now being AI generated and written by bots. So how do you make sense? How do you find the signal amongst the noise? And so it's really important to not just find yourself in one camp, but almost deliberately finding an opposing camp and finding vantage points from different worldviews. Because the way I kind of look at it is, if you take a AI as a central being, like if you turn a light on over here and over here and over here, all of a sudden you're going to see different sides of it. So the digital literacy and the ability to make sense of the information. So you've got really advanced skill sets within that realm. And so part of our responsibility as educators is to really raise the literacies, not only of students, but parents and of staff, so that we can make sense of it.
We're so far, like as a society, so far away from that already, because pre-general AI, just, you know, like people I know saying certain things, and I'm going, really? Like this is like on a political thing, really? And then you just go straight to any one of the scam sites or the, you know, the fake news, whatever things. And then you just find out in literally 30 seconds that it's a misconstrue of blah, blah, blah. And you go, but people read it on Facebook and they just take it as gospel.
Well, and so I find that those tales are really important inquiry activities for kids. So fallibility, understanding, fact-checking, finding a story that's taken to be this, and then going and finding the source of truth or multiple sources.
Can we backtrack a bit? Can we focus now on what the subject is, what it's called that you teach, this futures literacy, futures thinking, what it's called, and how you go about teaching and discussing these issues with your kids?
So I teach transformative technology, so it's a semester-based subject,
right?
And so it was developed in partnership with Sophie Fenton, who did her PhD research around human-centered learning in a cyber physical, hyper cyber physical world. And so we developed this module for students, and really the lenses that we provide are ethical and technical. It's understanding that yes, we can build lots and lots of things. Technology is often an extension of reach, and it can do tremendous good. It can also do tremendous bad. But one of the key elements that's missing is exploring the ethics of it. So part of what we do is you need to play with the tools to build up capacity. So if I take ChatGPT, one of the key things that we explore is the fallibility ChatGPT. So I'll give you an example. We're both football fans. I said to the kids, choose an area.
So that's just for the non-Australian listeners. This is the Australian football game, right? The one that gets some of the biggest crowds in the world. But let's end it there. Yeah, keep going.
And they're an expert in their space. And I said, ask a question that you know lots and lots about, and to deliberately prompt ChatGPT to not lie to you, but just to find factual information, deliberately contain that information to its data set. So not anything post 2020 or 2019 or whatever it was, and see how it goes. So I'll take a Dustin. One was a Richmond fan. So Dustin Martin, when did he win the Norman Smith medal? And it listed just 2 years, and then kept asking questions. And so it self-corrected itself. But what it taught the kids, and so that was just one example. Another example was that apparently Queensland's not in Australia. It's separate to Australia. Another one was the nationality of a particular soccer player. So you could see quite factual, simple information that they explored. But it gave them a little bit of trepidation around trust. It can't just take this verbatim and just dump it across. Now, some kids will. It just had them paused and explore the fact that this may not be factually correct. Yeah. So how do I then take it, verify it? What's my process of sense making around it? And that was a really, really important part. So we do explorations like that, like mini little quests to test out a particular lens. So we use, there's a tool from Hugging Face called Diffusion Bias Explorer. And so you can take to image generation models, so DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, and you can have it look through its database for a classification. And so according to Kate Crawford from Atlas of AI, data classification is world building. Like you can shape a world based on how you classify it. So I'll give you an example. When I put in an intellectual teacher, what do you think as an image generation it shows up? What style shows up in the images that are generated?
If it's a male, then he's wearing a cardigan, probably got glasses on, fairly short hair, 50s.
So, and a beard.
Probably a beard.
So, and then if I just change the adjective exploring and I say emotional teacher, then what are what are the images that show up when you explore that?
It'd be more likely female.
Yep.
Probably on the weak side, whatever that means in terms of, which is a bad thing, but I'm just saying. And I guess younger, possibly not showing emotional from a strong point of view, but emotional from a weak point of view. So not coping with the class or something like that.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You get typically a primary school teacher, female, young. And so all of a sudden, that's the data that has been trained on. So for us, that's building a world. So what we're saying in this world is that intellectuals have to be balding, bearded men post 50, and emotional teachers are typically younger females. So all of a sudden you can see the world that's being built and shaped just by the data. So I can explain that to students, or I can take them on a line of inquiry and use a tool and explore it that way. And so then what we do is we bring that into the room. And that's just some of the best discussions that I've had as a professional. It's just potent. And even from kids, you typically would say would be reluctant participants in discussions because they get emotional about it. They get fired up about it.
Can you give us, without mentioning names, can you give us some examples of discussions that have blown you away?
So one of the discussions I asked them, I said so this data has been trained on this data set. All right, so imagine now that we were to take an AI and train it on all of your data, every interaction that you've had online, every message, every email, every group chat, every image you sent, every photo you took, and we were to train an AI based on you as a data set. So instantly the kids are uncomfortable. So we talked about, so what would it find? And then we posit the question, what language would it, it would swear a lot.
So are you working with a mixed class, or is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And so it's broad ranging. So it's, so we have every gender, and we explore, just positing that question, you get kids who bounce back and forth. And part of the frame is to let them know that we need to be able to discuss these things, and we need we need to be doing it in a civil way. We need to understand that the different vantage points, culturally, there's different vantage points. And so that discussion went for 25 minutes on a simple exploration of what an AI would be and what your footprint would be. And so it started to explore to kids patterns that they had, patterns of online behavior, patterns of using technology covertly, things that perhaps are a little sinister, or perhaps behaviors that are really, really good. Some online citizenship. So we had this tremendous discussion around digital citizenship and your footprint. And that led then into data. So I said, well, where does that data live? And so we led into a discussion around TikTok and the fact that it has a bit of a permeable gate with the Chinese government. And so all of a sudden, just a provocation around an AI trained on you led to some systemic conversations around who owns the data, can I opt out, what happens if somebody was to give that data onto somebody else. And then we got to talking about Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram, and the fact that students are labeling photos that are potentially being used to train data sets, and is that ethical? And so all of a sudden, you've just opened their aperture based on one question and a deliberate discourse into something that's incredibly potent.
And so when we were talking before, you were mentioning that when you're getting the kids to think about futures, the default tends to be the dystopian futures. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it's not surprising. I suspect students are a little bit more skeptical than my entrepreneurial, I'm obsessed with AI people. But so can you talk about the dystopian futures first?
So one of the previous assessment I used to run with the students was so we explore a futures thinking approach, which is to look at signals. And so I often find as like strange things that are showing up now that are the potential of a new future. So
and so can you really describe the signals thing, because that was something that caught me out last time.
Yeah, so I'll give you a concrete example.
Yeah. So
it might be a new technology like a flying motorbike. Yep. So I find that futurism.com has some tremendous kind of categories. We're exploring like cultured meat, so meat made from mushrooms. So we collect these strange things that happen at the edge of society. They're not normal, or they're just on the outsides of normal. And we kind of look through them. And so we'd say, well, who here is vegetarian? All right. Who would eat meat grown in a lab? No, I wouldn't do that. Why? Well, what the flow-on effect of what it might do to it's synthetic, the flow-on effect of what it might do to my biology. So a signal really is just, the simplest is exploring small-scale, strange technologies, happenings, movements, and then imagining them at scale. What does a world look like if you have flying motorbikes overhead? Well, if you have a crash on the ground, that's interesting. If you have a crash in the air, you have another axis to contend with. So how do we circumnavigate into air collisions? What happens if bike crashes and kills somebody. So we explore the morals and the ethics of it. And so a signal really is just something for kids to pick up as a little bit of a lens and look forward and look through it, and as a conversation starter.
Yeah. And so initially the signals tend to lead them down a dystopian path.
Typically they do, and sometimes it's a world they want. So kids absolutely. Oh, I'd love to live in a world where there's autonomous vehicle, or there's a hyperloop, or there's the ability to travel to space. Some kids love to live in that world. Other kids are like, no, it's not for me. And that's where the many futures elements comes into it. Right. You go, all right, well, that's not in my future. I don't see that. I wouldn't move towards that. I'd move away from it. The other part with a signal is, and you touched on it before, Richard, was what's driving this particular change. And so if we look at what's driving artificial intelligence development, well, capitalism, definitely profit. But there's also some bigger, larger things at stake, because the exploration of AI in the medicine field is potentially to cure diseases that have hamstrung human beings for eons. For the driving force behind artificial intelligence for education is the hope to personalize education and provide human agency. So there are a lot of driving forces behind it. And Andy Hines from University of Houston, he's got a couple of categories of kind of key drivers across the world. And so the kids then start to understand, okay, so this is a signal that's happening. This is what's driving it. Is this something that we want? Okay, so then that gives them agency, because you can, for example, with climate change, kids are very, very vocal about climate change and doing something about it. And so for them, agency is they'll protest, they'll be ethical in their choices. So it gives them the possibility to make and do things differently. It
would be interesting to feed all the scientific data into AI and let it train on that and say, okay, in 100 steps or less, can you describe how we can fix as a global entity what we need to do? It'll be very interesting to see what it spat out, if it's not being influenced by big business and it's just like a pragmatic spit out. But of course, is how valid is that? Anyway, it's just
so instantly you're basically practicing futures thinking there. So you see, thinking about it, that would be great to do. So then with that world, imagining a world where that's at scale, what does that look like if you were to look around? What are the pros and cons? What are the things that may happen? What are the things we might be blind to that we may not see? And so if you have a look around in a world where we come together, we've put regulation around AI, we've stymied the stranglehold that the big tech companies have on it, and we come together for a common good and create AI for common good. What does a world look like without cancer?
Yeah.
And so you explore that. And so part of what you've just done is using human imagination. And this is where I find futures thinking, so the human intelligence, the ability to hold many stories in our mind, plus AI, so computing power and the ability to do at a scale that we cannot do. That for me is a world that I'm pretty excited about.
One thing, it's maybe not directly related, but it's a bugbear of mine, and I am planning some events where we're talking about this, and that is the impact of AI on creativity, or the impact on educators' perception of society's perception of the importance of creativity. And when I say creativity, I'm talking about an author who can research a book for 3 years and then just have this amazing work of fiction, maybe historical fiction, whatever, or an artist that is, they've spent 20,000 hours practicing but they're in that zone right? The zone. Yeah, Keith Richards famously will never take credit for the songs. He says, "Oh, I don't know, man. It's like they just come from up there. I just write them down, but he's not falsely being humble or anything. He's dead serious. And so there's this creative space that is human. But guess what? You can only do a Keith Richards version of it if you're a damn good guitarist and you've got that kind of thing going. You can only invite the creative space if you're a writer, if you're a really good writer. Like Nick Cave famously goes to his office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, to be creative. And sometimes nothing happens, but that's his discipline, But when he's in the zone, I'm sure he's in that zone. And my question, and I'm just throwing this at you because you'd be a good person to bounce it off, but my fear is not so much that, well, that's just, the books are going to be written by AI. That's a whole other interesting story. But that, there might be this unspoken idea that, kids don't really need to, be very good at writing anymore, because as long as they can do good prompts, as long as they know the prompts to use and so on and so on, they'll be fine. But if you can't write, you can't assess whether something is good the way it's structured. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that creative piece is, I think, really important. And I just wonder if you had a comment on that.
I've got a few comments. One is, for probably one of the best books on creativity is Rick Rubin's book.
Oh, yeah.
Magnificent. Not what I expected to. Magnificent.
This is the music producer.
Music producer. So worked with, Slayer, everybody. He's just a magician. And one of the things I love about creativity and that deep flow experience is it's often the most incredible human experience when you merge with the moment. Yeah. So we've just had a moment. So conversation typically is a flow experience for a lot of people, because where did a half an hour go? The time distortion is a potent thing. So if all we are doing is generating content through the medium of AI, then we're losing out in the human experience. That's totally. But because I love to write poetry, I love to play music just because.
But here's my concern. Sorry, I might have to. The lights. I've got a window here, and the lights all changing. What my fear is, though, is that the people developing, or the AI enthusiasts, are not even thinking about creativity. They probably don't even know what that space is, nor do they care. And that's a bit of a concern if there are techie. I mean, they're being creative within. There's two levels of creativity. There's probably a whole lot of them, but you can be very clever at code, right? And there's a level of creativity there, but that's not. I'm talking about that deep flow state.
So you could say that their deep flow potentially has the flow-on effect of robbing people of their deep flow. But I'd actually say that Tristan Harris's first movie and the Center for Humane Technology at looking at social media has had more of an impact on robbing people of their attention spans and that distractibility, because the ability to find flow comes from having the capacity to sustain attention for an extended period of time. So, but it also, if you look at Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who did the original flow research, is you've got to have a certain skill and challenge balance. It's got to be just right, the kind of Goldilocks tension. So you can still find flowy moments if you have a low level of writing, just not going to find them as often. Yeah. A virtuoso pianist is going to have the ability to get to deep flow more than a beginning piano player. So what we have as a responsibility as educators is to build competencies and capabilities, skills, and protect that space from distractibility.
I agree, and one of the reasons why I'm wanting to make a bit of noise about it is because I don't see that issue being raised. I mean, I'm sure it is, but I haven't seen it. You know, like, hang on. So, you know, are writing skills more important than ever now? I think they are. And like, do we need to be able to, you know, like I've got a friend who just throws stuff into ChatGPT, and that's the articles, but he doesn't have any lens as to judge whether they're any good or not. And I can tell you they're not any good.
I've read a lot of ChatGPT stories. So part of what we create a speculative fiction piece. So like creating an artifact like the AI dilemma, social dilemma, and I walk around that world based on the signals the kids find and the stories and et cetera, et cetera. And the ChatGPT stories suck. I deliberately push back and prompt. And it takes the best stories come from those who read the most and who have the most literacy, because they have a higher standard for what they want. They have better prompting skills, and they will just continue to press and press. So my challenge is, if you give all the struggle to an AI, you rob yourself of the learning and you rob yourself of flow.
But here, look, I'm sure there will come a time where there will be a book that is technically fantastic that's written by AI. And I think about this, and I think that's a sad day, because, you know, these people who, like, hats off to these, you know, these authors where you read a paragraph and you go, wait, whoa, how did they think to put those words together to elicit that, right? So my next thought is, I have to go to YouTube soon and hear this, because you're reading a book, but it's an insight into the way their minds work as well. Even if it's not telling even if it's like a story based on fact, there's still an aspect, a big aspect of the way they see the world that makes them interesting as to hear them speak, right? If I want to read a book by AI, I'm not going to want to listen to that thing being interviewed because it has no life experience. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's the same with music. It's the same with music. You know, like I hear great music all the time, as you do. You want to find out who's making this. What are the characters like? What's the personality? What's their story? That's a big part of it. I don't know if it is the same for everyone else, but I'm sure the music market's going to be swamped with AI generated music, which I can't imagine being very good. But then it comes down to, well, it all depends on the awareness of the listener, or the awareness of the reader, of the awareness state of the humans that are consuming this stuff, and do they care? So
it requires an increased level of consciousness.
Exactly.
So you think about LPs, for instance. So there's no reason why an LP should still be popular, but they are. Why? Well, there's a sound quality to it, but there's also an experience felt. And I do believe that, and maybe this is the sort of the idealist in me, but maybe the world that we will outsource stuff to AI that we just need to churn out. But the experience part, that resonance where you get that deep connection with the piece of writing or the music, will have more space for that. And so part of what we'll hopefully see a resurgence is in the arts, in the ability to create and make and do. But it requires a certain amount of skills to be able to do that. So that's my hope, is that AI can help us with the areas that we need to just churn out. to create space for the areas that we just want to be in and experience.
Yeah, so I think it's going to push people into wanting an authentic human delivered piece of art. I mean, surely a book that's been written largely by AI has to be, that's already been labeled that way, isn't it? Like it has to be, it's got to have to be, but it should be fairly obvious anyway.
I think so, but then the other future to live with is, what about if a book that was written by an AI that was really good?
But that's,
and you found out after the fact. So first of all, there's a level of deceit. Like it feels like
well, for me, before I start reading the book, I'll go straight to YouTube and find some interviews if there are any. And if there are no interviews, I'll go to Wikipedia or somewhere and find out what the story is. Yeah. So, but because that's a big part of it for me. I want to know how these people think, what they're like, whether they're producing music, art, whatever.
And so the interesting part is to explore that as a human experience. Is you want to connect.
Yeah.
So I need to connect with you. And so I think of, like, I love Alan Watts, like listening to Alan Watts. I find his laughter and his way of telling a story. And then I can read Alan Watts and it's still potent, but it's not as potent as hearing him speak, and the raspiness of the recording, the resonance that comes from things that, like Keith Richards said, that was spoken through him. And it's captured and documented in the book, and it's great. But there's just something about that experience. And that comes down to the fact that human beings love stories and we love connecting with it. We've always connected with it.
Well, I hope you're right, because that is a big fear of mine. Like, I got a 15-year-old who's, I don't know, 250 pages into this book that they're writing, and an avid reader, and we have album nights once a week. And I was going to ask whether, do you think that the fascination with the LP is because it kind of forces you to listen to an album? It's much harder to just make a playlist of, tracks 2, 5, and 7 because it's an LP. I wonder if that's part of it. But Elsie sort of came to me to say, look, it'd be good to start listening to albums. And so, we went through the entire Cure collection from album 1 right through to this took a couple of months.
And so that experience cannot be captured by AI as a data set, because it's lived experience between you and your son. And I feel like that's more, if we can be more present, which is flow, we can be more conscious, be more in it. And so we can outsource that to create the space for that. That's the win. Because I have so many CDs, and my son, when I introduced him to music, and he's 8, and he he loves Black Sabbath, and he's got a broad range of music, very heavy music that I like, and he's found an affinity for. But he said to me, Dad, there's a book in here. And I said, yeah. So those books, like that the CD notes, somebody put that together as an artifact, and it's captured. And there's people, I used to find bands to go and check out based on who their inspirations were. And for me, that just is the serendipity of that. There's the moment of, I'll see what I find. Yes, an AI can go to Spotify and generate a playlist based on my previous playlist. That's cool. But there's something about thumbing through an LP, a CD, and let's put this on. And my friends come over and we do the same thing. They pull a CD out, put it on. Do you remember where we were when we first heard this? Do you remember? And that, you can't rob me of that. So that my hope is that we move into a space where we have a little bit more freedom to be in moments.
Yeah. Can I just finish off with an anecdote? I was in Adelaide in a period of time, and I used to go to this pub every couple of weeks or whatever. And my favorite band was called Billy and the Redfins, which is this prog band. There was a saying, like 60 people would turn up Like they were going nowhere. There's no way they were ever going to have any commercial success. They did a lot of originals. They were sort of King Crimson influenced. And I sort of befriended the sax player. And during one of the breaks, I said to him, so what keeps you guys going? You know, like what's the thing? Because no criticism, but I mean, you're not going to be pumping out a single anytime soon. And do you know what he said to me? He said there've been two occasions, one when we played live and one when we were in rehearsal, where we just all got on the same page, and it was a spiritual experience. We just hit this other plane, and it was incredible, and we want to do it again. And I've never experienced that as a musician, but I knew exactly what he's talking about.
I have experienced that.
Best answer. Now, can AI touch that place ever? No. But see, again, one of my concerns is I think that the developers, the drivers of AI, don't acknowledge that space is real. And the conservative scientific paradigm says man is a machine. And that thing that Richard Andrew just mentioned about the band, that's just complete bollocks. You know, that was just a fantasy that they thought they experienced, but they've probably taken too many drugs or whatever. But it's definitely not something that musicians can have, right? Because they've never experienced it, and it doesn't fit the scientific paradigm of humans being machine-like. And I guess that concerns me, that I don't know, but I suspect most people developing AI have kind of a more conservative view of consciousness and all that sort of stuff. But let's not go there. I'd love to do a chat with you about AI and consciousness and what does it mean and etc. But look, to the listeners watching this live or on replay, I hope you got something out of this. I feel like we're just getting started. I think it's a really important discussion, but I do feel it was very open-ended, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, it was what it was. Steve, do you want to have a closing word?
Yeah, look, for that moment, those musicians shared, it's called group flow. So check out the work of Keith Sawyer. He's done tremendous amount of research behind it. So there's a lot of scientific rigor to it.
Oh, okay.
And my advice to people is to find what you love doing and do it just because. Just because. Not for any other reason, but just because. I have a guitar right next to me over here. I pluck it out every night and I play it just because. And it's happy. I guess
the question that we could go into another time is, are we at risk of, you know, this idea that, you know, follow your passion, and then, you know, if you play your cards right, that passion can turn into an income. Is AI going to make that a more difficult reality,
or make it a reality?
Yeah, but see, people are seeing that, oh, well, great, because I wouldn't know one note from the next, but now I can use AI I'll pump out music on my YouTube channel or whatever, but I don't have to know anything about it because I'm just going to get AI to do it, you know, and I'll just get good at prompting it, and it doesn't wash with me. I'm sorry, I'm a purist, but the same in the writing space, right? You got people who've got no writing skills, but who are just slaving away for a week, prompting, hey, I've got my 350-page book, story of blah blah blah.
So I always go, the measure of a good book is its rereadability, and so I love Martin Shaw. I think his books are just tremendous, and I reread those because I love them. He just writes in a way that just speaks to me. And so I think that there'll be a space for the AI generated thing, and there'll be a space for bespoke, handwritten, beautifully crafted work. You know, like Red Hand Files by Nick Cave is potent work. And thanks for that little tip, because you have a moment with it. And so I think that's
extraordinary. If anyone has not come, just Google Red Hand Files. And yeah, he's an amazing writer.
Yeah,
we should talk about that next time, and how it came to start those little dialogues. Hey, Steve, let's wind it there. That's nearly an hour, my gosh. And thanks for the chat. Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
And we'll catch you next time. So thanks, everyone. And check in a few days' time. The replay will be both on the newsletter and also on the event. page. And if you want to share it around, that'd be great. Cheers, everyone. See you. Bye. Hey, can I share a thought that I think I got when I was about to go to sleep? So I'm thinking about language and how, so now the speed of this is ramped up, AI development, because everything's seen as language, like everything's language. And so can AI become intelligent, right? and so I'm thinking, but AI's intelligence is 100% focused on language and feeding it that language and getting it to learn. So it's like there's this planet called language, and AI can only operate within that. It can't go outside those borders. Then put that to the side. Now you've got humans. We have language, and the language is important, but the language is used to communicate this experience, which is beyond language. And so if we have this planet called language that's within the humans have like dreams, consciousness, all sorts of experience. And sure, we think in language. I often wonder about our cats. Do they think? But do you need language to think? Like, how does that work? So the more sophisticated your language is, the more sophisticated your thinking can be. But never. And then there's revelation. There's new ideas that you've never thought about before. That's a completely different universe to the AI universe. And I think that's a worthwhile thing to explore, because, and again, I fear that the people who are the most enthusiastic about AI don't even care about that, not even thinking about it. Because I hear people thinking, oh yes, well, AI is going to become conscious, and I'm going, what? Because here's someone who doesn't understand consciousness, and then you get into the but humans are just machines anyway, and then you get into that difficult conversation that I had one a few weeks ago. I thought, okay, so she absolutely believes in this human is a machine. There is nothing outside that. Awareness it's all contained. But I just thought that was interesting. Just thinking about how intelligent can artificial intelligence get, and then they go, but it's all based on language. That's the limit of its thing.
Well, I often refer to language as a technology.
Right.
And it's limited. So you think about flow, that's a word that doesn't describe the experience, doesn't even come close to describing the experience. But we kind of have to give it a container to just be able to talk to it. But you kind of...
Flow is a combination of language and revelation and consciousness and wisdom and all those sorts of things. Like, what's wisdom? You can't have an AI machine with wisdom. Wisdom is life experience. It's this greater thing. And like, I guess my hope is that as our world becomes more influenced by AI, that there's going to be an extra driver towards those other experiences, the wisdom and the other thing of it. Like, what's the rush? Like, okay, AI's here. We can do things faster, better, quicker. Who needs to do anything faster, better, quicker? Like, seriously.
Yeah.
And here's another question. Yeah, AI's got all sorts of advantages, but the potential downfalls are huge, especially if you pay attention to that AI dilemma. What's the chance that the benefits are actually going to outweigh the negatives? Like, really? And I don't hear anyone talking about that either.
Well, like it will amplify if it's trained on data that's biased, which it is, then it's going to amplify and exacerbate current divisions and representation. So all of a sudden you are underrepresented or you're underprivileged at scale. That's massive. You don't have access to the technology, then you don't have it. That person plus AI, and you don't have it, exacerbates inequality. So on a massive scale, it is just an extension of what's going on in the world, and that scares me. Because inequality at scale is horrendous. So part of what's required is regulation. Part of what's required is voices of reason like Tristan Harris and those to say, hey, you know what? Look at this with a more open eyes, ask better questions.
Yeah. It's just that the way our capitalist society is set up is that, like, if you're going to have something like AI descend on the human population, then what's the worst system you could possibly devise to maximize the chance this is going to go wrong? Well, you'd have a capitalist system where the big tech companies can be a race to the bottom or a race to the top to get it out first and make the first $1 trillion. And so then your checks and balances have to be put aside because that slows everything down. But these are the people who are saying, look, we know there's a problem here, but we can't stop because of that system.
There's Andy Hines, who I spoke about in our chat. He does tremendous work. He's written a book called After Capitalism. So
what's his name?
Andy Hines, Hines, After Capitalism. So it's basically post-capitalism thinking, and he's a strategic foresight guru, thought leader. So that would be something to check out. He did.
Have you heard about have you heard of the was it basic human income?
Yep. UBI.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that if I mean, apparently there's no modeling in this industry anymore. Like, I don't give a toss about models or the modeling industry, but I find that tragic. We don't need to not have a modeling, do we? Like, I find that tragic that now there's some technology. We want a model that looks like that. So sorry, all those people who have invested their time no longer have a job. Like, it's not necessary. Like, all it's going to do is allow some businesses to make more money, but it's not going to flow on to. Do you know what I mean? I find that stuff difficult.
Yeah.
All right, mate. We got to go. Thanks for the chat.
No problem. Awesome.
Stay in touch. Catch you.
See you, bud. Bye.